It's like maybe you're really more into the comms space, maybe you're more into the advocacy or public policy space. So in that case, you probably should have like resume, either like separate resumes for separate categories of positions, or at a minimum, defined resume bullets that you kind of tweak and use for particular applications, just so that it's something that you have kind of ready to go.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee, where I help you do more with less. I'm very excited to have our first ever guest of Mindful Morsels, Brandon Wu. He has started a weekly internship bulletin board for open positions across government, think tanks, and other progressive nonprofits and firms, mostly located in DC. You can check him out on LinkedIn, Substack, and all major social media platforms. That's Brandon Wu to find this list. I was lucky enough to take some of Brandon's time. He is both a student and working full-time, where we discussed some of his latest bulletin board postings. I also talk about my latest Notion template titled Job Seeking as a Student as a way to organize this job search if you are a student. It's definitely something I would have used if I was still a student. We end with a fun segment of in and out, where we describe one trend with job searching that's in, as in good, as in hot, etc., and one trend that is out, so not good. I'm sure people who are more online than me would be able to come up with better phrases there. I'm so excited about this episode. It's my first collaborative episode in a while, as in years. So without further ado, let's get some people closer to employment. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mindful Morsels. My name is Sam Lee. I'm here with Brandon. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is Brandon Wu. I'm currently a student at Georgetown, but also interning full-time and doing a master's in Asian studies.
Awesome. And what are we talking about today, Brandon?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Brandon's internship bulletin. So that's a Substack that I started back in August, really to help folks who are looking for jobs get access to all of the different open positions in politics, in different think tanks, in the nonprofit world, generally with the progressive lens, all in one place every single week. And I really started it because I found that the job search was really difficult in the 5 or 6 different resources that were out there, where you would have to go through multiple newsletters to try to find the positions you really wanted to apply to. So my goal was to make it as accessible as possible for folks to see, the different DC based and remote internships that are out there, and really level the playing field.
Awesome. And what do you think makes it different from maybe other bulletin boards that are out there?
Absolutely. I think that every bulletin has its own quirk. So for instance, like the US House and US Senate have their own separate bulletins, and they go a little bit more into detail on the different details for how to apply to different offices. Whereas some other bulletins will generally be very short. They'll just hyperlink positions. So my goal is to try to find kind of an equilibrium between the two and give just the most important details, such as the dates that the internship is going the position will be, the hourly commitment, how much you're getting paid, and when you have to apply by.
Okay, Brandon, what internships/job postings are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's like 5 different positions that I think are really, really unique and different qualities that they have. And they also span multiple fields that I think are worth discussing.
Okay.
The first will just be a generic advocacy organization that I think is fantastic to work for. It's the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union. They're hiring for positions in Washington, D.C. and New York, and many of those positions are hybrid or remote, so they allow for some flexibility for folks who might have a busier class schedule or can't go off campus that often. Notably, they also pay $20 an hour for undergrads, $24 an hour for grad students.
Nice.
And I think the different positions span a lot of fields. So if you're interested in communications and kind of getting a understanding of what press releases look like in the advocacy space, or how to effectively communicate and message, that's going to be something particularly relevant with the next administration. But there's also a number of other advocacy and organizing related positions that I think are interesting.
And what are like the general deadlines for these applications?
Yeah, so the ACLU is interesting because all of their applications are technically rolling, which means that they'll just close positions as they fill. So for instance, if you had looked at the ACLU's website maybe a few weeks ago, they probably had like 5 or 7 positions more that were open. But basically, they encourage candidates to apply as early as possible so that basically your applications are read as soon as possible.
Got it. And what do these applications usually entail?
Yeah, the ACLU and most, I would say, advocacy space organizations generally ask for a resume and cover letter, and that's really it. Some of them might ask for a writing sample, but I think ACLU is very simple with the two documents. And I would say on occasion there might be some short answer prompts about, for instance, like your alignment with values of the organization, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, for instance. But yeah, I would say it's not super, super complicated.
Okay, awesome.
Great. Well, the next position is at the National Education Association. They are kind of like a large teachers union is the best way to explain it. But what I found really special about their internship posting is also the diversity and the types of jobs that they have. So for instance, if you're interested in education policy, if you're interested in polling, strategic research, or even like collective bargaining and like union organizing, I think that the NEA has a lot of great opportunities on that. So what they're also, they have like a 20 hours max a week commitment, which I think is good in terms of folks who, again, are doing like full-time work. And they also have options for hybrid, in person, or virtual, on top of being just like a spring semester position.
Great.
Great. And then the third position is actually a think tank role. It's at the Pew Research Center. They're currently hiring a content analysis, religion, and world affairs intern, which I find to be really niche, but also really niche. Special. It is more of a full-time commitment, though. It's at like 37.5 hours a week, which is like oddly specific.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they pay DC minimum wage, but it is hybrid.
And these specifically for students again?
For students, yeah. I think recent grads can also apply for this role as well, because Pew, I think, tends to look for folks with a little bit more experience, especially because the work you're doing, and this role in particular is, I think they call their title like coders, where you're basically using like different content analysis research methods to look through like international reports from the State Department on religious freedom and different conflict like databases that are out there.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think it's also a really exciting opportunity to kind of get your foot in the door in the think tank space, especially because some of the other ones out there, I'm thinking the Council on Foreign Relations, Atlantic Council, etc., tend to attract a lot of folks in the IR space who will like apply every single cycle. But there are like these positions at smaller think tanks, maybe like Pew, where there might not be as many people who are like automatically just applying because it's a big think tank, right?
Right.
So I think that makes it special as well.
Is this like hybrid, in-person, remote? Like...
It's all the above. So they're actually flexible to whatever you want. Like hypothetically, I guess you could work fully remote. Okay. I tend to think actually that like you should try to intern in person at least partially, just so that you have the advantages. Yeah, but I don't know, maybe that's a hot take. Sweet. The penultimate position, I guess, is from the Special Competitive Studies Project, or the SCSP. They are a 501c3 nonprofit foundation, but they are looking right now for a research and strategic assistant. So technically not even an intern, like I guess you have the assistant role. But I think what's interesting about their position is that there's like different areas of work that you can kind of choose to study in. So for context, they're an organization that makes recommendations to strengthen like global competitiveness of the United States in the long term, especially surrounding topics of AI and other emerging tech. So the different panels include like intelligence, future technology platforms, foreign policy, the economy. So depending on your interest, if you're studying econ right now in undergrad, or as a grad student doing like some kind of quantitative degree, you can like focus in that area. Whereas if you have, for instance, an interest in tech and emerging platforms, you can also choose to kind of specialize with that in that position. So it is, I think, 20 hours a week, and they do ask that you have some kind of background in IR, in CS, in engineering, library sciences, security studies, or regional studies. So they're really looking for a plethora of different roles. Right. So I guess it's like a really great opportunity to break into a different space.
Right. Did you say library sciences?
Library sciences.
What is that? Do you know?
It's like the study of how you collect information, and then like you like basically like think like the Library of Congress, right? Like how, coincidentally, I think they're also looking for someone right now as well. But like, how can we take all of this information that's out there and organize it in a way that's accessible to researchers?
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
So that kind of work.
Yeah. Does Georgetown offer something like that? Or unfortunately, no, I don't remember seeing something like that.
I think there might be like stuff at our library, like Lau might do some kinds of courses.
Okay.
But on like a more unofficial basis, like show up for a meeting, as opposed to like a class you can sign up for.
Okay, yeah, good to know. What was the name of this organization again?
It's the SCSP, the Special Competitive Studies Project.
Okay, got it. How long has this organization been around? I've never heard of it.
That's a great question. I think they're not super old. Like, for
Okay.
at least I know they've probably been around, I would guess, like if they're focused on AI and emerging tech, probably within like the last 5 to 7 year, maybe even more recent.
Yeah.
But I would say they definitely have, they're not one of the like the institutions that have been around since like the 1990s.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Great. And then I'll wrap it up with the final position at one of my favorite places that I wish I could have worked at, which is Amtrak. Amtrak is hiring so many
Oh,
interns.
I've ridden Amtrak like 3 times over the past 3 weeks. So,
Really?
Yeah. I've
Oh
been
yeah,
a
you had like the
lot.
work trip.
Yeah, we've been going to Philly a lot, but continue anyways.
Great stuff.
Yeah, I'm well acquainted with
I'm
Amtrak
sure you
at
know
this
Amtrak.
point.
Yeah, I feel like you could probably just work there based on your writer experience. But yeah, they're looking for a ton of different people. They're looking for people working on engineering, obviously, production, like maintenance. They also hire a ton of like HR adjacent related roles, which I find
Cool.
interesting. So like employee relations, inclusion and culture, diversity recruiting. But also like if you're interested in like strategy, they have like a long distance service strategy role, like how Amtrak can build out in the long run to serve more communities that are like more longer distance trains as opposed to like the Northeast Corridor.
Right.
And finally, there are like 2 really niche roles that I like. One of them I had like gotten a first round interview for and then like ended up not working. I basically like had already accepted another position at that point, but it's their counterterrorism analyst role and their crime analysis role.
Wow.
Both of them are focused, and I think those 2 positions are also renewable. So like you work there summer of 2025 and summer of 2026, and it might even convert. No promises, obviously, but to a full-time job at Amtrak after graduation.
Wow.
Because I think those are 2 areas where they're obviously trying to prevent accidents or incidents happening on Amtrak rides, and also that if crime were to occur, like they know how to follow up on it.
Right. That's super cool. Where is Amtrak like headquartered? Like
Yeah.
where is the office?
So most of their positions are based out of their DC headquarters.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, they also have some roles in Philly, in New York, in like Connecticut. And then I would say some of their more HR centered roles tend to be remote or hybrid. So
Got
you
it.
could technically work from home and do work like in the diversity recruiting space, or they have like a future careers programs internship, which I think would oversee actually like the internship program for like the fall and the spring semester.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, because I guess I always thought about Amtrak as just like the train, but yes, it makes sense that there's offices and people need to be employed there. So that's very cool.
No, for sure.
About that. Yeah.
And like the biggest perk too is you get unlimited Amtrak rail pass privileges for the summer.
Okay.
So if you're like a big train rider,
see.
or like I don't know, I've heard of like Amtrak interns from their like website who like went on a long distance train to Chicago for the weekend.
Yeah.
Or, like took the train in the Rockies, like in the upper north, like the Northwest U.S. area.
Yeah. Wow.
So, really
Was that
cool.
like a motivation for you to apply? Because I feel like you're like very big on public transportation.
Honestly, like I was so captivated, I guess, by the idea of like getting unlimited rail rides or
It's
like
romantic.
Yeah,
It's quite
literally.
romantic.
Like the DC Metro does the same thing for their internship. You get like an unlimited
Sure.
Metro pass,
Sure.
as do I think all the airlines as well, which they like give you free flights or whatever. So that's a big perk.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. That's good to know.
Sweet. But yeah, those are like the 5 positions that I think I wanted to go through since they have like pretty open rolling deadlines.
Right.
So I think for all these positions actually, with maybe the exception of Pew, like you can apply pretty much any time in the next few weeks and your application will get accepted. But some of them will probably just evaluate your application earlier if you submit it first.
Right. And for Pew, like, do you know when the deadline would be?
I think
for that.
Pew's timeline, from my understanding, is like within like 3 weeks they tend to close their positions.
Okay,
Just like
within 3
based on the
weeks.
space. So I would say like if it was posted maybe last week, then within like the next 2 weeks you've got to apply.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the new job postings, I wanted to talk a bit about a Notion template that I have just created. It's called Job Seeking as a Student, because I think that with Notion templates, and I say this every time, but Notion is a productivity software. You can use it on desktop, tablet, mobile, Android, Apple, something else you might use. And it's a tool that basically helps you organize whatever you need to organize. It's used by individuals, teams, companies, etc. And one thing that I think helps people either get into Notion or get more familiar with Notion are these Notion templates that people like me create. And one template idea that I had was how to balance the job search with school life, because I think that what a lot of Notion templates do well that are currently on there besides mine is they either focus on like building out a really good Notion template for the job search, or like discreetly they have a Notion template just for like your school stuff, so your homework, your tests, your office hours. I'm sure there's more. I mean, I've only been out of school for a few months, but I feel like I'm blanking already. So I thought it would be nice to have a template that combined those two elements, because I mean, as I'm sure you know, you can't just do one or the other. Like, you're doing both at the same time, which is why it's stressful. Yeah. And that's where I think tools like Notion really come in handy, because it allows you to, I wouldn't say like relieve stress, but just manage it a bit better. So I created this template. It's called Job Seeking as a Student. And some of the tags that I thought were relevant for it, I'm sure the marketplace has its own tags, but there's some AI involved, job search, obviously, schoolwork, and it being a Notion template. And I just wanted to create like a simple and effective way for people to track their job searching while in school. Yeah. So there are 4 main components. First, it's going to be just a calendar view of what's coming up. The second component is all the schoolwork that you may have in a given semester or year. The third component is the job process side, so whatever applications you might be going through. And then the fourth main component is the original database that is really just there to collect all the information, make sure that if you ever need to like find something in the original form, it's going to be there. So starting with the first component, Notion also has a calendar app now, and would highly recommend. It's called Notion Calendar. It integrates really well with your existing calendars. So GCal, iCal, again, maybe a different calendar that you might use. And this is just a simple way to see what is coming up during the week. It updates automatically with all your information. And if you want to look at just the upcoming week, you can put on filters, or just even the upcoming day, whatever is most relevant to what you need at that point. And then the second component is the schoolwork section. So I just put in a couple of sample tasks, but let's say you had math homework, very imaginative, but here's where you could put any of the assignment materials, any of the relevant due dates, and things of note. I also put an example of final essay, which is a choice to pair with math homework. I guess it might be a very different type of week for the student, but same thing where you could easily track all the assignments or tasks that you might have. Moving on to the job process component, I, again, just put an example of a data science application. I recently ran like a Tableau workshop at campus, so I think data was on my mind. And again, similar thing, but instead of the list view that the schoolwork has, I think that one better view for the job process is by stage. Mm-hmm. So depending on, right now it's sorted by date, but you could sort it based on if the stage of your application is you need to apply, or you need to network, or you're interviewing, or you're waiting to hear back, or you need to follow up. The gallery or the board view that it's set up is helpful, where you can just slide and see like where each stage is, so you could see which of your prospects might be better and which might not be as good. And then the original database has this AI feature on the side where it will just list automatically like key information. So let's say for your math homework, like an important distinction is that, like, I don't know, maybe a goal you might have is like to get 100%, and a reasonable goal, I'm sure, mm-hmm. for everyone. And the AI component of this would probably capture that and just give you a reminder. And then there is one chart that I thought was relevant. Notion released a chart feature this year. It's definitely still in like pilot mode and people are getting more used to it. But I think it would be a nice way to visualize this, maybe how much again you have during a week in terms of your job stuff or your school stuff. That might stress you out, but I think some people would find that helpful. And there's different charts, not just pie charts, but bar graphs, line graphs, and other ways to visualize as you see fit. And then at the bottom, there's just a feedback form if people want to leave their feedback. Yeah, I think, again, I want to create templates that I don't see on the Notion template space, which can be challenging because there's like thousands of them now. But this is one that I thought did fuse something that I hadn't really seen when I searched it up. And I hope that to complement like the internship postings and job postings, people know that there are pretty good resources out there. No resource is perfect, but like pretty good resources like Notion that can really help you to structure and not feel as overwhelmed. So yeah, any thoughts on this Notion template, Brandon?
Yeah, no, it's definitely really fascinating because I think I use Notion actually for my like job search stuff. I use their like standard job employment template. I think that's out there.
I think a lot of us have used it.
Exactly. And I think part of my issue with it is that like I do have to kind of use other tools. Like I have a Google Calendar, I have like Todoist for my like to-do management. And so I think that having everything kind of centralized in one place, especially as a student who's already balancing so many different responsibilities, can be super, super helpful. So I think that like you've really done a great job of like creating that hybrid that is really important for folks who are trying to do schoolwork and apply for internships at the same time.
Yeah. I didn't know you used Notion for the job stuff.
Yeah,
how do we
I
not
do.
talk about this?
I don't know how it hasn't come up either. I mean, it's like on a like some things I might not
Right.
end up using Note, like for like government jobs, you just like apply with the resume. So sometimes I
Right.
don't really track that. But for like private sector positions or nonprofits, for
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
No, that's good to know. Okay, so everyone should use Notion then,
Definitely.
because the 100% here you already use Notion, so it's happening. It's happening. All right, so welcome to our final segment of this podcast. This is the first time we're ever doing this, so I hope this goes well and is fun and helpful and informative. But basically, we'll be doing a segment called In and Out, and as we have stated earlier in this podcast, it will be one trend related to the job search that we think is in, as in you should do it. It's 2024 / almost 2025. It's time. Versus one trend that we leave in the past and hopefully never comes back. So Brandon, I will let you start. What's your in? What should we be doing right now?
Yeah, I think a big in is trying to do as much advanced preparation for both interviews and future resumes that you might be sending out. And what I mean by that is essentially you want to have really great examples for the common interview questions that you might be getting. So what is one time you made a mistake? What's a project you've worked on that you're proud on? What would you say is your greatest weakness or vulnerability? Like basically you don't want to be caught off guard in potential interviews or even like conversations in networking where you're trying to come up with things on the fly. It's best that I think you have some good grounded context on what you're going to say so that you really are prepared going into answering that. And similarly on the resume front, I found that, generally speaking, when you're applying for internships, they'll sort of start to fall into a few buckets. Like maybe you're really more into the comms space, maybe you're more into the advocacy or public policy space. So in that case, you probably should have like resume, either like separate resumes for separate categories of positions, or at a minimum, defined resume bullets that you kind of tweak and use for particular applications, just so that it's something that you have kind of ready to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think just based on the examples you put for common like questions to prepare for, I would say that maybe the most basic and common one is tell me about yourself.
Exactly.
And you'd be surprised, like if you don't prepare that, like I have definitely gone into interviews preparing for everything but that. And that's the first question.
For sure.
And you only can make a first impression once, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like definitely covering your bases in that way is important. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. And then what is your out? What should we not do?
My out, and maybe this is like a slightly hot, warm take, I would say, is really not relying heavily on a cover letter template.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is that I have some people in my life who like generally will just like copy paste in like the name of the organization, the title, and like stick to pretty generic language on like why they want to join the company and what qualifications they have that make them a strong fit, right? And obviously, like I think to some extent, like I'm a little bit on the extreme side where I quite literally like I write a cover letter from scratch pretty much every time.
Okay.
It probably as a result has led to maybe maybe not an ideal result with certain like positions where maybe if I had used some standard language it might have been actually more helpful for me. But I find that like that first, because the way I structure cover letters, and everyone does it a little differently, is like I start with like why I'm interested in the company and the specific position, and then I move into like what skills I've developed from previous positions that make me like a strong fit for this role. And I think that especially since your resume already does the job of like explaining your qualifications, you really want to be as specific as possible in what like responsibilities you've done in the past correspond to the responsibilities you'd be doing in this role. On top of like obviously when you're interested in a company, like you shouldn't be using, like if you could take out the company's name and put in a new company's name and that cover letter sounds generic, then in my opinion like that's not going to make you stand out as a strong applicant.
Yeah. How long does it take usually for you to write these cover letters then?
That's a great question. I think it honestly depends on my passion for the role.
Sure.
Like there are positions, for instance, like I remember when I applied for a House like internship in an Austin representative's office. Representative Greg Kassar.
Brandon's from Texas.
Yeah. The Houston. And so I knew that he was a community organizer. I had friends who worked on his campaign, so I knew his values, at least like his office's values, to say the least. And so for me, it was pretty like really quick turnaround to like draft and then submit that cover letter, because I knew like, oh, like the policy positions he's advocating for in Congress are exactly in line with like the experiences I've had back home in Texas, right? Whereas for some other positions where maybe I'm trying to like pivot into a new, like airline internships, even like we've talked about, it's a little trickier to like think through why am I aligned with the mission of this company and what specific things do I think I will get out of the position. Those kind of take some more introspection and marinating.
Yeah.
And so I think those might take a little longer.
That makes sense. Let me ask you like a binary question. Is it worse to use a cover letter template like the way you described, or is it worse to let ChatGPT do it and just submit?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Because ChatGPT technically is not templating; it's doing its own thing.
That's true.
So what's worse right now?
Yeah, what's worse? I think I would say probably with a template, like you're obviously crafting the language. With ChatGPT, there's kind of the variable of like you don't know what they might say about the company and the mission. Like I think with a caveat that like if you are literally just like putting in like the job description and please write a cover letter for me and like here's my resume, I would say it's probably a little riskier to use ChatGPT just because maybe it's not like sometimes, for instance, if I remember right, like GPT-4 at least uses the most recent data, but like 3.9 or whatever it was before was using like archived data. Right.
Yeah.
Like the data is not live. And so for instance, if a company's values or their mission statement has changed and your cover letter cites something that's old, or like some companies have even tried to like AI proof their job descriptions, like they've done the thing where like in the middle of a paragraph they say like please reference like this random value if this is like what is it, like an open language like if it's an AI tool, like put this in the cover letter. And so like if you don't catch that, you're probably like obviously not going to get the position, and it might even have like potential other consequences down the line. So I would say it's a little riskier.
Yeah, and I think even with the newest GPT models, well, I think OpenAI recently put like the internet search as part of the setting, but I think that when like doing, let's say like research in GPT, even when you ask it to like cite sources, if you click on the links, sometimes they don't lead anywhere. And you're like, well, this is useless. So a good way to identify a hallucination is if they're sourcing and hyperlinking and it doesn't go anywhere. So just adding on to the potential risks of using a tool that is supposed to help you in that 100%. Regard.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Any other comments on your ins and outs?
I think that covers everything. Yeah.
Okay. I will start with my in.
Yeah.
And I think that my current in is networking in person over virtual. And I think that this one requires a bit of explanation because like who wants to put in the extra effort? But I will say, we are still like in that post-COVID phase where like yes, things are relatively normal, but I feel like even a year or two ago it still felt like the default was to be like we're in COVID, like let's do virtual, or even like not even like a synchronous video call. Sometimes it was super informal, and or yeah, informal is a good word. I just think that based on my experience of like last year especially, even though the majority of my networking was virtual because the people weren't actually in DC, the way that I ended up making like the strongest connections was always in person. And I think as a student or somebody who just is relatively busy, like it can feel hard to make that effort. But I think that it doesn't even matter if you're in a city like DC, it's just like anywhere. Like if you're trying to work there, being able to like feel the person's vibe like in person is just so different. I'm making it sound like a date, but like I just think I've had so many, and like no offense, like I've just had so many useless virtual networking calls where I'm not that interested, they're not that interested. It just feels like an obligation. Definitely. And I wouldn't say that's like a waste of time, but at least if you have that in person, I just think there's so many more natural benefits of probably having a longer conversation.
Yeah.
Probably being in a space that's more comfortable than like you anxiously waiting on the Zoom screen, or like if there's internet problems, that's also like such a pain. And honestly, what I think in the near future is that we're going to keep going back to more and more in-person interviews, especially when you get to those second rounds, those third rounds, those finals, because going back to the AI point, like I read an article a few weeks ago about how people will be like ChatGPT as they interview, and companies know that, and
100%.
Even if they can't prevent that at every level, by the time they're like seriously considering you, that's why so many of those final rounds are in person.
Yeah.
So I think if like one very important goal of networking is to get a job at some point, putting yourself in that position early to be like, okay, like this is how I'm going to commute to the place and the logistics and make sure I have my correct papers, I think it can only set you up well, especially as we get more and more normal post-COVID. And I think that was something that I kind of like didn't want to think about for a while, as everything was so virtual and it was like so easy to just do X amount of networking calls. But I think like one solid in-person networking session in a day is probably better than like 3 virtual. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. I think that for networking, like quality can sometimes really outweigh quantity, because you could talk to 4 people on a team at a company, but if it feels impersonal, it feels like it's an obligation, as you kind of mentioned, then you're not getting anything out of it, and they also might not feel like it's a good use of their time. Like it's like a mutual loss, which like is frankly the worst outcome that you could have from like a networking chat. So I definitely agree that trying to find those in-person conversations are really, really valuable. And especially at like new organizations you might be starting at, like just like getting a hold of an org chart and like pulling people over if you like see them for coffee or something, that can be so valuable, because sometimes you don't even know like what like there's obviously the things that you want to talk through, and hopefully like the opportunity to either get a referral or like have follow-up conversations that lead to something down the line. But there's a lot of like unexpected maybe like rabbit holes or like twists and turns in a networking conversation in person that I think just don't really happen on the phone or like on a Zoom call.
I agree. So I remember I think Georgetown does this every year, but there's like a career setter event that's like how to network without losing your soul.
Yeah.
I never went personally, but that would be my response. So like that prompt, because it could be super draining. I actually put up an Instagram poll yesterday about like just thoughts on the job search, and I'm curious, like I think we're currently at 67% of respondents say that the job search is mostly draining. 21% say it's a necessary evil. 12% say it's fun, which I would question and would love to hear more from why people view it that way. And 0% said it wasn't applicable. So everybody's job searching, and a lot of people clearly find it draining from my millions of followers. And I think like that is a key way to make networking specifically less draining, where like you actually feel like you're like, for lack of a better word, connecting with someone versus like an obligation.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to my out. So I've been thinking all episode like how to phrase it, and I still don't think I can like phrase it super well at the beginning, but I'm going to try. So I think my current out, and I'm sorry to the companies that like host jobs, but I think that what is out is applying to job postings that aren't on the native company website. So those are your Glassdoors, your Indeeds. Again, like, you guys do great work. I'm not trying to bash, but what I have found is, first of all, jobs that aren't posted directly on the company's website are probably at least a little outdated / maybe closed, and they just like to not get around to taking it down there.
Yep.
And also sometimes like it has different descriptions as well. Like it doesn't even sometimes like compare to what the actual job is. And also, like, going back to networking, if you get a referral, like, it's never going to be through a third party site. It will be directly for that company or organization system. And again, just based on my experience, I feel like I have applied through third party sites. I'm going to stop naming names because I don't want to call any specific company out anymore. But like, I have applied for my fair share because the value out of those sites is that they're so convenient. Like, they are so convenient. They are supposed to help you like make the process more streamlined, usually with now more automation, more AI. But I think I haven't worked at like too many companies yet, but just based on what I've seen, like, I don't think they're really tracking it that much through that. Like, I think like ideally you're able to talk to someone, they direct you to like their referral link, but even not, like, they could just direct you to their organization site, and that is like should be your source of truth. But I definitely have applied on third party sites. I'm sure others have as well. And I think that I think we should leave that. And again, like, I hope these companies are fine, but like, I don't know. I think I have definitely felt like going back to like wasting time. I think that has felt like more of a time suck than finding those positions, doing like that one extra step of to go into the organization, because it is an extra step sometimes. And then maybe you'll find it doesn't exist anymore, or that it's completely different.
For sure.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that I didn't really grasp until, honestly, a few years ago, where I would see like the easy apply button on a third party site, and I was like, great, they already have my resume. I can just like click one button and hopefully this like company will get my app. And I think out of like the times that I did that, maybe one company followed up with me out of like the dozens, if not like high single.
You can say hundreds.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if I applied to hundreds of, but like maybe, honestly, yeah. So I think it is definitely a time suck in that the benefits are far outweighed by the costs. Like, there just generally is not a big advantage. I will say I do get the job alerts from some of those third-party sites for the internship bulletin. So what I try to do is like basically just go to the company's website and see if that position is still open. And I think that simple like, it sounds like it might take an extra step, and sometimes there are some, I will say, like, my qualm with a few companies is like sometimes they'll hide their positions. Like, they'll put an internship position not on like the careers page, but on like the student programs page. So it's like 5 clicks to like get there. And I don't know what benefit a company has to gatekeep their internship, but it's like, obviously I don't work in HR, so no judgment. But for me, like, those third party sites definitely, they might be a good resource of just like, I almost think of it like, you know how some professors are like, oh, you can like look at Wikipedia, but you should like click to the sources. Yeah. I think it's the same way. You should always go to like the original company site.
Yeah. And I'm glad to know that you have your fair share of experience with it, but I definitely agree. And again, like, I think the value add is that convenience of just taking that extra step. And even if like it adds a few minutes to that part of the process, I think it will save a lot of time later on when you are trying to find a job. Well, yeah, that was great. This was super fun. And thank you for coming on the show, Brandon. If people like this, maybe we could make it more of a recurring thing. But anything else you want to say about?
No, that covers everything.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee. I hope you found some Notion tip, budgeting advice, or other insight helpful to make your life slightly less stressful. If you want to see or hear more of Mindful Morsels, feel free to like and subscribe on Substack, where you can find me by searching Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee, and also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you'd like to have some input on episode ideas, feel free to vote in polls I put out on my YouTube channel, and that handle is Sam H. Lee. Until next time, I'll see you then.